Here with us is former Republican governor from Minnesota and former presidential candidate Tim Pawlenty. Governor, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Hena, to you and your viewers.
Thank you so much. So you won a second term as governor. You are a political executive. What differences does a leader experience or how they're treated differently the second time around?
Well, I think you gain incredibly important insights as to how the system works, especially if you're an outsider like Donald Trump. I was a majority leader of the legislature before that, so I had a bit of a running start. But I think he definitely, like all of us, would have learned some lessons, and he's articulating those lessons from his perspective, which is he wants loyal people in the administration. He doesn't want people who think they know better than the duly elected president of the United States. And he's outlined a pretty aggressive and clear agenda, which I think he's going to implement in the first 6 months, especially if he has a Republican House.
Well, look, he enters the second term in just 71 days. What do you think he should focus on when it comes to helping Americans and gets into the White House?
I think he would be well served by implementing the things that he ran on. If he gets a better handle on uncontrolled illegal immigration, keeps a lid on inflation, improves the economy, takes some steps to run so-called wokeness run amok, and those other things that he ran on, that will be a powerful legacy and a validation of his campaign promises.
The president-elect has focused on immigration, obviously, and economy. What challenges will he face trying to get his policies in place?
Well, I think one of the biggest dangers lurking for President-elect Trump is the potential for the reignition of inflation. And part of that is in the hands of the Federal Reserve. Part of that could be triggered by other events like an unfolding geostrategic event in the Middle East, causing oil prices to spike. Or if he goes too far with tariffs, that could also reignite inflation. So populist movements have almost always been involved with or correlated to inflation and also concerns about immigration. And those two forces are going to need to be tackled if President Trump is going to be viewed as a success.
I want to ask you about Democratic governors Maura Healey, J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom. They're all saying they're working to insulate their state from Trump policies. Gavin Newsom called it Trump-proofing. What do you say to those governors who are already creating friction with our president-elect?
Well, it's noteworthy that some of those same names also overlap with people who are probably interested in running for president in 4 years. And they live and work and lead in blue states. But, you know, there's only so much a governor can do to rebuff a federal initiative, a president and a Congress who are passing laws that affect the whole country. So a lot of it, I think, is just rhetorical flourishes. I'm sure there'll be lawsuits that they'll bring and their attorney generals will bring. But the fact of the matter is, if the president of the United States and the Congress pass a law, it is very difficult, short of the courts overruling it, for the states to turn it back or really not implement it.
Let's talk about your state specifically, the great state of Minnesota. Trump flipped several counties near the Twin Cities red, and that's with Walz being from Minnesota. What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me that Governor Walz was never really all that popular in relative terms in rural areas anyhow. And some of the suburban vote that we lost to Biden in Minnesota came back to Trump this time. And I think that partly relates to these same issues we talked about before. Suburban voters perhaps were unsettled by the abortion issue or by January 6th or other things in 2020. But in 2024, those concerns were overcome by their desire to see immigration controlled and have it be safe and legal and orderly. President Trump had an attractive, proposition for that. They also were sick of crime, and they're also sick of inflation. So I think the issue set changed, and President Trump had a strong political poker hand to try to bring back some of those suburban voters. And of course, he mopped up in rural areas. And Governor Walz, was always popular in sort of the deep blue parts of Minnesota, but less so in rural areas.
So what are your thoughts on Walz now following the Harris-Walz election loss, especially not only nationally, but in Minnesota?
Well, I think Governor Walz, the strategic theory behind putting him on the ticket in part was he was going to attract voters from the heartland. And if you look at the election results, that was a flawed theory. That didn't happen. Can't all be laid on his doorstep. Obviously, Vice President Harris was an underwhelming candidate in that regard as well, and she's going to have to take the bulk of the blame. But he certainly didn't deliver what I think they thought he was going to deliver, which was some incremental additional vote from the heartland voters. And the red part of the map after this election shows you that experiment was a failure.
Well, we always appreciate your insight. Governor Tim Pawlenty, thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.